Okay, shut up, you guys. I want to talk about Artemis Fowl in this year of our Lord 2025. Show of hands, who read these books as a child? Okay, I can't see you. Follow-up question, who remembers when the film adaptation was released in 2020? Less of you, I'm pretty sure, but again, can't see you. I feel like when this film came out, it did not get a lot of press in mainstream or independent media. And yes, we are well past the heyday of this series' popularity, but when The Uglies film came out last year, another adaptation of a YA novel from back in the day, at least people were talking about how bad it was, but this film no one seemed to talk about. And spoilers, it's bad, so it's weird that people don't want to talk about it. This film was pretty quietly released on Disney Plus after its theatrical release was canceled due to you-know-what, and a few years later, it was just as quietly taken off. Why did the big mouse make this cut? Well, a little bit of corporate greed that deems it better to permanently erase all traces of a piece of media that a lot of people worked really hard on rather than pay them some paltry residuals every now and then. But mainly, it's because its reviews were abysmal, which is a huge shame because this movie has been in the works for 20 years. I remember waiting for it back when Cameron Diaz was rumored to be in talks to play Holly Short. Side note, when I released my video on How to Train Your Dragon last month, my mom called me up and said, I don't remember you being into this series when you were a kid. And I had to explain to her that I was fully 20 years old when I saw How to Train Your Dragon 2 on an airplane and decided to make an animated movie my personality for a full year. But Artemis Fowl I was into in elementary school. I never finished reading some of the later releases. I fell off around the part where they used time travel to get characters to kiss that shouldn't be kissing. But the first few books meant a lot to me. So when this movie finally came out, I was excited to watch it for that reason and also because it was 2020, so there was nothing else to be excited about. Now, one thing about me is I don't need my adaptations to be 100% faithful. I guess I'm just a low-maintenance girly like that. When a story enters a new medium, I recognize that things may have to be edited out, added, combined, or just plain changed. And I certainly don't care what color someone's eyes are or if an actor's face shape matches the animated video game character they're portraying. Seriously, touch grass. But I do think that when you're adapting something, you need to look at what people love about the story and the characters to begin with, and whether the changes you're making are adding or detracting from that. And Artemis Fowl, the movie, is a masterclass in what happens when you don't do that, and when you try and just make the most generic, crowd-pleasing film possible while banking on an established IP. Don't get me wrong, messing with the source material is not the only mistake that was made in the making of this film. The acting is so universally stale that you gotta blame the director and the dialogue.
Thinking you're outsmarting everyone in your little suit and sunglasses. You're enjoying all this. You think it's a game.
Game? My father was kidnapped.
My father is dead.
Bitch, me too, you're not special. Also, please listen to this line and tell me what you think they're saying.
A little potion of nettles and wasp juice.
Apparently it's wasp juice. I didn't hear juice. But I do think the main problem with the film, the reason it became barely a blip in the memory of those who watched it, is because clearly they didn't think about what makes these characters work in terms of plot, emotional resonance, and just making a damn lick of sense. And instead saw them as little putty figures to mold however they wanted to create a lowest common denominator action adventure movie for kids. So today I'm gonna go through every character, what was done to them by this sad, boring movie, and how they're an example of how not to adapt a book. And also some changes I thought were pretty okay. There are some of them, I think. Let's start with Artemis. Artemis Fowl II, the protagonist of our series, is the son of billionaire criminal Artemis Fowl I, and in the words of Ben Affleck, our boy is wicked smart, to the point where in the first book he tracks down the fairy's hidden Book of the People, decodes it, and uses the knowledge therein to kidnap his very own fairy. He's also a huge asshole and a total dweebus. So why did the book's audience latch on to this character? He doesn't have a lot of the typical makings of a YA novel protagonist. He's not a kind-hearted underdog, he's not a blank slate on which we can input our own selves, and he doesn't have two hunky love interests to choose from. But Artemis is the perfectly executed version of the asshole genius. He is a power fantasy for any kid who will never get to beat up their bullies, but may one day have them working for them. He's Sherlock Holmes, he's Tony Stark, but 12 years old. And what's more, I'd say he's an even more well-rounded depiction of this trope than some of his more mature counterparts, because although the book never dismisses how freaking cool what this kid is capable of is, he also frequently faces the consequences of being a little too smug about his abilities and learning that his actions affect the few people that he actually cares about. Accountability? In my male protagonist? It's more likely than you think. Don't get me wrong, it's not like some after-school special moment. It's just that sometimes Artemis girl bosses a little too close to the sun and has to divert his attention to saving the life of his bodyguard/father figure rather than trying to steal the moon or something. I don't think he actually ever tries to steal the moon. The moon is controlled by imps. Also adding to his well-roundedness is his aforementioned dweebusness. This is not an athletic person. Frequently, the cool stuff he does with technology and logic is just a little bit undercut by him having to be flung over the shoulder by someone bigger and stronger, because that's just the only way he's not gonna die. So cut to the opening of this film where we see Artemis getting some surfing in before school. You know, as pasty Irish children are wont to do. Comment below if you're an Irish person who surfs in Ireland. Like, I'm sure you exist, but do you? So it's immediately clear that movie Artemis has had one of his major flaws removed and is now a bit of an action hero in addition to being a child genius. And if you think action hero is a bit of an exaggeration, wait till the scene where they give him a gun. But okay, Tony Stark gets to shoot things too, albeit not when he's 12 years old. Again, this is a child with a gun and everybody just thinks that's cool. But he can still be the genius asshole, right? Well, the only person I'd say he's an outright asshole to is his school counselor, and that's after this dude tells him that it's sad that his mom died, but she really should have done a better job parenting him before she bit the dust, so I don't think we can use that as a judgment of his character. In terms of his intelligence, he may still be a genius, but not a mastermind. Everything in the books happens because Artemis sets out to do wildly ambitious things with his big, beautiful mind. In the movie, he's just propelled forward by events set in motion by his father and his father's enemies, and he does so more competently than the average tween, but at the end, when he proclaims himself a criminal mastermind, it's just, no, you're not. Go play Fortnite. Artemis Fowl is played by Colin Farrell and apparently was only added during the reshoots. I feel like his agent just told him there was an Irish-centric franchise he wasn't currently a part of, and he just showed up and committed before reading the script. This character in the film has both been overdeveloped and made far less interesting than his book counterpart. Artemis's dad starts the book series as a true criminal mastermind with seemingly very little in the way of a conscience, and actually isn't physically present because he's been kidnapped by the Russians and presumed deads. And honestly, props to this book geared towards 9 to 12-year-olds for naming the Russians as the bad guys. It may be an easy target, sure, but not so easy that films like Top Gun don't skirt around directly naming them and instead just feature vaguely Russian-like bad guys. I will always dunk on Top Gun, and it's only a little bit because of how hard I cried when Goose died. Oh, and if you haven't guessed, Artemis Fowl Sr. is supposed to be a bad dad. He's just kind of neglectful and does not maintain a great work-life balance while going toe-to-toe with the Russian mafia. Colin Farrell's Artemis Sr., and I'm trying to think of a more creative way to say it, but he's just a good guy. He's just a nice guy. He's still implied to engage in criminal activities, but instead of it being for the purposes of making himself rich, it's to prevent dangerous magical artifacts from falling into the wrong hands. He's still rich, but I'm sure he obtained his wealth in a super duper ethical way. He's also not always physically around as much as a dad should be, again, because he's off Indiana Jonesing or whatever. But when he is around, he's spending quality time with his son and instilling him with all kinds of knowledge about fairies and magic. Artemis Sr. in the books isn't such an important character that he can be ruined, but ironically, by being more present in the film, he kind of ruins everyone else's development. Artemis in the books is partially fueled by a desire to prove himself to his absentee father, and gives himself permission to act in morally questionable ways because that's what his father would have done. He is also shown to exceed his father's abilities and discover the fairy world entirely by his own means, whereas again, in the movie, he's simply following down his family's legacy. Domovoy Butler is Artemis Fowl's bodyguard and general right-hand man. In the books, the Butlers are an entire family line of bodyguards who work exclusively for the Fowls, with each butler being assigned a fowl. Funny how that just works out mathematically. Fowls are also never supposed to learn the first names of their butlers in order to maintain a level of detachment, because it's entirely possible that their butler may have to lay down their life for them. I 100% understand why they chose to toss out most of this lore in the movie. Having one family who has existed for generations basically to serve another richer family to the point of dying for them, in retrospect, wild. The Butler family is also black in the film, whereas in the books they're implied to be Eurasian, a fact that caused some controversy when the casting was revealed. Now, this is your bi-weekly notice that I am still very white, and so will not be commenting on the ethics of making a character from one ethnic minority into another. But with it being what it is, and Domovoy being played by a black actor, I understand why they turned him into a more typical employee instead of a man bound since birth to serve and protect one family. That being said, all this lore about the transactional and impersonal nature of the Butler-Fowl relationship does serve one purpose in the books, and that's to juxtapose what's really going on with Artemis and Domovoy, which is that Domovoy is fully Artemis's dad. Not his actual biological dad, that would have been a plot twist that the world was not ready for, but Artemis's father is absent for most of his life through the equally powerful forces of the Russian mob and men not being shit. And his mom is not much better, so our boy Butler is full-on pennyworthing it, playing the dual roles of employee and father figure. And that's what makes it so heartbreaking when he dies in the third book. Don't worry, he gets better. But that scene is so well written that I remember it to this day. It's when we do get the reveal of his first name, which serves both as an acknowledgement that his relationship with Artemis has extended past what it was supposed to be, and also a tragic acceptance of his demise, since he wouldn't have broken this golden rule if he thought he had a chance of living. And though Artemis and Holly do manage to bring him back to life, there is still a cost in that he loses much of his physical capabilities, which translates to his ability to protect Artemis, which he views as his life mission. If this all sounds a little heavy for you, don't worry, none of it is like that in the movie. Artemis and Domovoy's relationship in the movie is nothing, and that's barely hyperbole. We really don't know what their relationship was before Artemis's father disappears. He seems to work more closely with Artemis Sr. than Artemis Jr., and there's no clue as to whether he has acted in any way like a father while Artemis's actual father is away, or whether he's just like some guy who's in their house. So when the film decides to shoot their emotional load early and put Domovoy's fake-out death scene in this installment, not a wet eye in the house. We don't care about this dude's death, no matter how much Irish poetry and flute music you layer over it. Okay, while we're on the bouteilles, let's talk about Juliet, Domovoy's sister in the book, niece in the film. Juliet is 16 in the first book, and I think changing her age to 12 is not a good change, but it's not anywhere near the worst. I think it's important that Artemis not have any peers his own age. He is surrounded by older people, most of whom he does not consider his equals, but even those he holds in the highest esteem cannot fully relate to him since he is a child despite his best efforts. It helps flesh out how he's an isolated little guy. In addition, in future books, as Juliet ages up to a young adult, we get to see her struggle with if she actually wants to follow through with her family's legacy or forge her own path. Agency in my supporting female character? It's more likely than you think. But I'm not dumb. I understand why they made her 12. They wanted a character for the young girls in the audience to identify with. And since society keeps forgetting how imaginative to the point of almost insanity little girls can be, they figured that character also has to be a little girl. Like I wasn't out there in my backyard pretending that the apple tree was a dragon who could turn into a unicorn and also an apple tree. And that would have been fine. It would have been nowhere near the most egregious change in the movie. But what might be the most egregious change is turning that character from a deadly martial artist in training to a girl who literally just makes people sandwiches. That's all she does in the movie is make people sandwiches. That scene where Artemis gets to shoot a gun, that should have been Juliet. If 12-year-old boys get guns, then 12-year-old girls should get guns. That's feminism. I think that's all the humans we care about, so let's talk about the fairies. Holly Short is our secondary protagonist and was originally envisioned to be kind of the John McClane to Artemis's Hans Gruber, which again makes it super weird when they kiss later because of time travel. Some of the problems with movie Holly are a little more ambiguous than the others. She just ain't that spunky, y'all. Where's the spunk? But if I had to focus on more tangible things, she has a similar issue to Artemis, which is that much of the conflict and resolution that informs her journey is driven not by her, but outside forces, which are mainly her dad. See, in the books, Holly mainly has to prove herself to her fairy colleagues and superiors because she is the first female LEP recon officer. Now, does this make sense? No. You're telling me this civilization has widely surpassed humanity in terms of technology, magic, environmental sustainability, basically everything, but they've never heard of lady cops. Didn't make a lot of sense in 2001 and even less so in 2020, but it does communicate to us that Holly Short is a headstrong go-getter who doesn't play by the rules. And sometimes she's a messy bitch, and that's fun. In the movie, Holly's dead dad, who is dead, is thought to be a traitor to the fairy world because he stole a very important MacGuffin. And because of this, no one trusts Holly. Now, I'm not saying this isn't entirely contrary to the nature of humanity or fairy-nity, but it does mean that the most important thing about her is something that doesn't have anything to do with her. Commander Root is your classic cop boss person. He's always yelling that he's gonna have people's badges, he's always smoking a cigar, cop boss person stuff. And in the movie, he's played by Dame Judi Dench. Now, this could have been iconic. The gender swap does not bug me at all. As I've said, ladies can be cops now. It's a brave new world. But instead of diving into this character with a level of commitment that we know she's capable of, Dame Judi really just lowered her voice an octave and said, "That's quite enough character acting for me. Thank you very much." I want the Commander Root that turns beetroot red from yelling at her cronies. I want to see her throw things at a horseman. I want Judi Dench as J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson. Instead, we get her as this Dumbledore/Yoda figure, forever calm, in control, and boring. I mean, we know she did this one for the paycheck. She has not been quiet about being very one for them, one for me when it comes to picking projects, but can't you just pretend you're having fun? You're making Josh Gad sad. But I mentioned a horseman, and I shall extrapolate. Foley is the centaur tech whiz of the fairy world. In the books, he's kind of a sarcastic conspiracy theorist IT guy who wears a tinfoil hat to keep humans from reading his mind. In the movie, he kind of looks like if a Vulcan went to Shiz University, and that's fine, even if they clearly put him in a skirt, not so much to push against gender roles as to leave most of the man-to-horse transition up to the imagination. Foley is the kind of character who maybe was always destined to be pushed to the side in a 90-minute film adaptation. Guess that's why they call them side characters. Well, but it's just another opportunity where it would have cost them nothing to lean into the tone of the books, which is part die-hard parody for kids, and given us the wisecracking hacker with bad fashion sense. But instead they continue to go for the generic and give us a relatively bland button pusher who's there to give exposition and look kind of hot. Who said that? Who called the centaur hot? I didn't do it. Opal Cowboy is the character they altered the most, and that's saying something because, again, they made Foley look like a polyamorous Lord of the Rings elf. Opal is the boss babe of the fairy world, competing with both Artemis and Foley in terms of intelligence and technical prowess. Honestly, at some point in the books, I think the number of genius characters actually surpassed the number of characters who aren't geniuses, but again, it's a power fantasy for nerds. Throughout the series, she goes from ruthless businesswoman to full-on megalomaniac trying to take over the world, but always while looking fabulous, or alternatively sometimes disguised as a child, because you gotta do what you gotta do, am I right, ladies? Honestly, I feel like if done properly, this would have been the runaway fan favorite character for little girls, but the fact that most young girls have a deep evil within their heart that they need to express is not something the world is ready for. In the film, I genuinely think Opal is the most generic villain I've ever seen. She's got a mask and a voice box and kidnaps the good guy to get her hands on the MacGuffin and speaks ominously, and that's kind of it. I think it would have been less insulting, if just as boring, if they had just made a completely new character instead of slapping this very unique and intriguing character's name onto a walking plot device. Maybe in future installments, the mask would have eventually come off and we would have met an Opal that looks anything like the original, but the creators seem to have forgotten that in order to make sequels where you can have that kind of payoff, you first have to make a first film that people actually want to watch. Okay, so many pages of notes later, let's talk about Mulch Diggums. Sometimes I feel like Josh Gad is in everything, and I don't hate it. I like Josh Gad. He signed that frog. Mulch is a small-time criminal dwarf who uses his innate digging abilities to steal stuff, an act we get way too much detail on. This is another case where I think the casting department did its job. It's always a pretty safe bet to make Josh Gad the extra goofy character in an already goofy movie. Not the Goofy movie, he wasn't in that. At least at the time of filming this, but watch the cast list for a live-action remake come out like tomorrow. This version of Mulch is still a wisecracking opportunist with a heart of fool's gold, just like his book counterpart, but they couldn't help but take a couple wild swings with this character that absolutely don't pay off. First, they make Mulch the narrator under the framing device of him being interrogated by some kinds of officials. Now, I tend to think that 90% of the time, narration is lazy and unnecessary. Sometimes it gives us insight into the character's mind that we genuinely couldn't have gotten any other way, but most of the time, I feel like it's the writers choosing to tell, not show. Or even worse, sometimes they tell and show, which makes it seem like they don't trust the audience to just get stuff. And again, this is supposed to be a story for kids that are a little too proud of how smart they are. Let them figure shit out. If they have to watch it twice, it's good for your streaming numbers. But I could have excused narration in a children's film if the narration hadn't been so cringeworthy. As I said, Mulch is supposed to be the character that keeps things light, and instead they've got him recounting all the other characters' backstories in this deep tone that's supposed to remind you how cool you should think they are. Like, again, if you want to show me how cool, say, the butlers are, show me Juliet doing anything that isn't making a sandwich. Then they've got this bit going on where Mulch isn't a regular-sized dwarf, he's a dwarfus giganticus. So just a dwarf that's the size of, like, a large-ish human. It's confusing, adds nothing to the plot, and clearly just happened because it was easier to make Josh Gad look big than small next to Judi Dench and a bunch of children. Now let's talk about the scene where we see Mulch dig into Fowl Manor. We see Josh Gad grab hold of his jaw and dislocate it to cartoonish proportions. He then delves headfirst into the earth, chowing down on dirt as he goes, and we see the dirt shooting out his backside. He is shitting out dirt as fast as he can eat it. And you want to know why this is the scene that almost broke me? Because it's 100% accurate to the books. They took so much from us. Foley's hat, Commander Root's cigars, the foals being morally gray men who can't run good, Juliet's love for WWE. But they read a scene where the dwarf breaks his face open and shits dirt and said, "We're not changing a goddamn thing." I guess they thought this kind of potty humor would be well received with the audience they thought they'd have, but the tone of the rest of the movie is trying to be so cool that this 30-second poop joke isn't gonna win everyone over, it's just gonna seem out of place. Anyway, that's it. Those are my blorbos and how they were altered beyond recognition. What can we take from this? A review of a movie that came out 5 years ago, based on a book that came out 25 years ago. Well, I think there's been a lot of discussion lately about people wanting original content as opposed to adaptations and sequels, but then some original content not doing well being held up as an example of people not actually wanting original content without the actual quality of the content being taken into account. Yeah, that. I think what we can learn from Artemis Fowl is that it's not about the source material, it's about whether you're trying to earnestly tell a story you care about, or you're trying to pump out content using a formula that you think others will like. A more accurate adaptation of the books would have been far better than an original film that hit all the beats of this one, not because it's always better to be married to the source material, but because the books are stories that someone actually put heart and care into. And a scene where a dwarf continually shits himself, but we'll forgive that. It's not about how literally original the content is or isn't, it's about having a movie that feels original. Did you watch this movie when it came out and just scrub it from your memory, or am I the only one? Do you have other adaptation horror stories from your favorite childhood series? Let me know in the comments. Remember to like and subscribe, and as always, have a delicious day. I'm not sure exactly where Josh Gad signed. It's all kind of faded. That's Rory O'Malley? I don't think you can see that.